Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how you can build one of these DIY wooden sleds. These are perfect for children. If you're like me and you can't justify spending $200 on one of these pre-built store-made sleds, you can easily build this for approximately $10 in material. All you need is some lumber you can pick up at any hardware store and an old pair of downhill skis. Here's a closer look at the DIY sled we'll be building in this video. As you can see, it works great for children, it glides on the snow well, and it's fun to build. For this project, I'm going to be using a lot of the measurements from one of these wooden sleds that you can purchase at most major stores. To build a sled just like this, all the material that you need is right in front of me. So I've got one piece of pine. This is a 1x4 piece of pine, 4 feet long. I've got one 2x2, 4 feet long. I've got 3 pieces of strapping. This is 1x3 strapping. And then I've got an old pair of downhill skis that we're gonna use. Typically, you can find these really cheap places like the thrift store or on a used marketplace like Facebook. You can generally buy an old pair for $5 to $10. I got these out of the garbage and they'll work perfectly. I'm gonna show you a close-up with the material just so there's no confusion. So this first board is the 1x4 and it is technically 3.5 inches wide and it is 3/4 of an inch thick. That is a 1x4 piece of pine, 4 feet long. Next we have a 4-foot 2x2. So this is 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. And that is also 4 foot long. We need one of those. And then we need 3 pieces of 1x3 strapping. 1x3 strapping is actually 2.5 inches wide, and it is just under 3/4 of an inch thick. And then we have an old pair of downhill skis. Next, for the tools, we're gonna need a drill and an impact driver. We'll need a tape measure. We're gonna need a jigsaw to make a round cut. And then it's also nice to have a miter saw. If you don't have a miter saw, you can make all the cuts with just a jigsaw. And for screws, we're gonna need approximately 100 1.5-inch wood screws. The first thing we're gonna do, we are gonna cut 4 slats for the seat. So we're gonna move some of this stuff out of the way. We're gonna take our skis, put them off to the side. Our 1x4 can go off to the side. Our 2x2 can go off to the side. And then we are gonna use the 1x3 strapping. So we want to cut 4 pieces at 30 inches. I'm gonna measure and mark 1, and then I'll show you just so that there's no confusion. Let me show you this measurement. So we are hooked on the end of that 1x3 and we have 30 inches measured. Now I'm gonna make this cut using my miter saw. If you don't have a miter saw, you can use your jigsaw to make this cut. And we want to cut 4 of these. Now that we have 1 cut, we can use this as a template. So just make sure that the ends are flush, and then you can simply take your pencil and trace out your next piece, which again will be 30 inches. Out of these 8-foot 1x3s, we can cut 3 pieces at 30 inches. We're gonna have a leftover piece, which is scrap. Hold on to this as we'll use it later on in the build. Here's the 4 pieces we just cut, and to show you again, they're all 30 inches in length. So we have 4 of those. Now we can take these 4 pieces cut at 30 inch, push them off to the side. Grab your 2x2. We're gonna cut 4 pieces at 11.5 inches. I'll measure this out and then show you guys the exact measurement again, just so that there's no confusion. As you can see, we're hooked on the end and we have our measurement at 11.5 inches. Now we can cut that piece and cut 4 of the exact same ones. Again, I'm going to use this to trace, so make sure that the ends are lined up, and then with your pencil, mark your line and make your cut. Here's the 4 pieces we just cut. Again, so that there's no confusion, they are all cut at 11.5 inches. We'll take these 4 pieces of 2x2, move them off to the side. Now we can take our piece of 1x4 pine, and we want to measure and mark 14.5 inches. So I'll make this measurement. Again, so there's no confusion, we're hooked on the end, and we have marked 14.5 inches. We need to cut 2 like this. After cutting the first piece, I'm going to use it as a template, set it on top, make sure the ends are flush, trace your line, and then you can cut your second piece as well. We've got these 2 pieces cut at 14.5 inches. These 14.5 inch pieces are going to be the bottoms of the sled that is cut on a circle like this. So I'm going to lay out some measurements on here, and I'm going to show you guys what they are, bring the camera in afterwards. The first thing we want to do is mark 3 inches from both sides. 3 inches in, 3 inches in. Next, we want to find the middle of this board. So the middle of 14.5 is 7 1/4, which we will mark. Now at this 7 1/4 inch mark, we want to come down and mark 1 1/4 inch. I'll show you guys all these measurements so that you can see this. On the bottom, we've marked 3 inches in from each side. 3 inches and 3 inches. This top mark is at 7 1/4, which is the middle of that board, and then we measured down 1 1/4 inch and made a mark. So now what we want to do is make all these same measurements onto that other board. Just like that, we've got the exact same measurements on both boards so that they are a perfect replica. Now what we want to do is make a circle that starts at this 3 inch line, comes to the 1 1/4 inch down, and then goes back to there. So I'm going to show you an easy way to do that. A really easy way to get a perfect circle is to use a 5-gallon bucket. Any 5-gallon bucket should work. So all we want to do is place it so that it lines up with our 3 inch mark on the side, it lines up with our top, and it lines up with the other side. Then we just have to move it so that it is touching all 3 of those spots exactly where we want it to. And then we can trace out our perfect circle. Here's a close-up. You can see the bucket is touching my 3 inch mark. It's touching my 1 1/4 inch mark, and it's touching my other mark. So then I just traced a line, and I have a perfect circle showing me exactly what I want to cut. And just so there's no confusion, we place an X for what we want cut. And now we want to do the exact same thing on the second piece of wood. This bucket method is definitely the easiest. Now we're going to use our jigsaw to cut out this circle. It may be easier if you clamp the piece of wood to your workbench. Using the jigsaw, follow the line. The circle that we put the X on is going to be scrap. Once you've cut the 2 pieces out, this is what they both should look like. Now that we've got our circles cut on these 2 pieces, we are going to begin to assemble the sides. So we want to take the 2x2s that we cut at 11.5 inches, and we want to screw them on like this. So when doing this, we want the side to be flush and the bottom. Now I'm going to screw it together. I'm using my 1.5 inch wood screws, and I'm pre-drilling first and then putting 2 screws in each piece. Here's a close-up. As you can see, we are flush on the side, flush on the bottom, flush on the side, flush on the bottom. We put our 1.5 inch screws in from the piece of pine going down into the 2x2. And now we are going to recreate that with the other 2 pieces. Just like the last piece, we want to line everything up so it's flush on the side, flush on the bottom, pre-drill, and then put 2 screws in each side again. Now that we've got our 2 pieces cut, we want to orient them so that the 2x2s are facing out. And then we can start to see the shape of this sled. As you can see, it's starting to take shape. So now I'm gonna measure out some measurements onto these 4 pieces, and I will show you guys what those measurements are. We've got our pieces all lined up. So what we wanna do is we wanna make sure that they're all flush at the front, and then we are gonna make some measurements. So we're gonna hook our tape on the back, make a mark at 3 inches, and then we are going to make another mark at 18.5 inches. Here's a little trick. If you have a carpenter's square and all the boards are lined up on the end, you can place the square on and mark all the boards at once. If you don't have one of these, you'll have to measure and mark each individually. So let me show you all these measurements. As you can see, we've got all the ends of the board sitting flush. Now, we made our first mark at 3 inches. We drew a line, and we made our next mark at 18.5 inches. So then what we can do is place an X in front of the 18.5, and we'll place an X in front, we'll place an X on the inside of that 3 inch. So that's what it looks like. Got our 2 pieces. We want the 2x2s facing out. So we're gonna orient the back like that and the front like this. Now we want to take all of our boards and flip them over so that the pencil marks are facing down. Line them up so that that line is sitting flush with the 1x4 where the X was. We're going to screw these down, 2 screws into each. Again, make sure that you pre-drill and make sure that all those lines, the 3 inch and the 18.5 inch line up with your 1x4. So this is where we are. We put 2 screws in each board, and we screwed down into this 1x4, front and back. Now the way that we line these up, as you can see, we lined this 18.5 inch mark up with the 1x4, and on the bottom side we lined our 3 inch mark up with that. So as you can see, 18.5 inch mark here, 3 inch mark at the bottom. It lines up just like that. Now we can take our last 2 pieces and we can put them on here. We want to have 1/2 inch gaps in between each board. So we should have some scrap 1x3 left over. If you cut it into 2 pieces, you can then use it as spacers. All you have to do is make sure that the boards are flush on the front, and then we can screw these down. We're still using our 1.5 inch wood screws, pre-drill and then screw them into place. We're going to do the exact same on the other side with our spacers, space it out. If you don't have any spacers, I've planned this so that there's approximately a 1/2 inch gap between all the slats. Now that we've got our sled to this shape, we want to build the outer boards. So on our sled, we're going to make them to go on the outside here. this maximizes the interior width. You could put them on the inside, but that narrows the inside. So we're gonna screw ours onto the outside, which I think looks better. I'm gonna bring the camera in and show you guys the measurement that we want for these cuts. So I've got my tape hooked on the edge of the 2x2, and then as you can see, it is approximately 20.5 inches to this mark. So we're gonna cut 4 pieces at 20.5 inch. Now, grab the piece of 1x3 that we had last cut. We took a 30-inch piece out of this. So this should be approximately 66 inches left. We're gonna take our tape measure and we are gonna put a mark at 20.5 inch. We're hooked on the edge. We've got our mark at 20.5 inches. We're going to cut our first piece, and then just like before, we're going to use that as a template to cut the other 4 pieces. We should have a little piece of scrap, and then we'll have to grab our last 8-foot 1x3 for the final piece. So now, as you can see, we cut these 4 pieces. They are all at 20.5 inch, and we are going to take them and screw them onto the side. We've got our sled. And what we want to do, we want our board to be flush with this outside here, flush with the top, and we want to screw it on like that. So the easiest way for me to do this is put the sled up on its side, and again, the front is this longer side. So we will take our board, line the edge up, and then pre-drill and screw this in. We're going to put 2 screws into each board. We're still going to be using our 1.5-inch wood screws. So now, as you can see, that's what it looks like. We are flush here, flush on the top, flush on the top, and then we have this last little bit sticking over, which is the same reveal as there. Now, what I want to do is I want to screw this second piece on. But instead of trying to guess where I want it to go, I'm going to take a scrap piece of this 1x3, stick it up like that, and then we will line this up so that we're flush on the side. Just like the last piece, pre-drill, put 2 screws into each side. Just like that, we've got our board screwed on. We use the 1x3 scrap as a spacer. And now just flip the sled over and we can do the exact same thing on the other side, lining up the top board so that it's flush, put the spacer in, and then put your bottom board on. As you can see, we've got the 2 sides for the sled. The front we're going to leave open, but we want to put the supports along the back. So you should measure yours just to confirm you have the same measurement from the outside to the outside. My measurement is 15 3/4 inch. So we want to cut 2, one for the top, one for the bottom. You can see we are hooked on the bottom, and when we come across, it is 15 3/4 inch. Using our 1x3 again, we will mark 15 3/4. We're hooked on the edge here, and we are marked at 15 3/4. Bring this over to your saw, make your cut, and then use that to trace out your next piece. When we screw these in, we want to screw into these. So we're going to line our board up so that it's flush, and then we can screw it together. This one you definitely need to pre-drill, otherwise your wood will split. We're using our 1.5-inch wood screws. Make sure everything is flush with the other side supports that we just put on. 2 screws into each. Just like that, we've got the back all screwed on. It's flush with the sides. Okay, our sled is coming together really nicely. We've got it almost all done, except we want to cut a piece that goes across the front here. All that does is it beefs this up a little bit, provides a little bit more support. So when I measure this, mine is 11.5 inches wide, which is what we want to cut our piece at. Just so that you can see this, we are from the edge to the edge, 11.5 inches wide. So I am taking my tape and I am marking out 11.5 inches. You can see we're hooked on and we are marked at 11.5 inch. This is the last cut that we have to make. The rest of this wood is scrap or save it for another project. Now that we've got this last piece cut, it should sit flush across. So I've got some shorter, these are 1-inch screws, and as you can see, they're shorter because we don't want them to come all the way up through here. So I'm gonna flip our sled over and I'm gonna screw this on from the bottom, making sure to line the front and the side up flush. I'm going to put 2 screws into each board again, and while you do this, just make sure that it's sitting flush with the seat slats, and make sure that you do use the 1-inch screws. If you try and use the 1.5 inch, they'll poke up through the bottom, and just like that, it's reinforced and stronger. You can see we've got our sled fully constructed. The last thing that we have to do is add the skis for the bottom. So instead of trying to bend wood, we're going to keep this really easy, and we're going to use old downhill skis. Measuring from the tip of the ski, 32 inches comes to approximately here. So we need to remove this front binding, and as you can see, there are 3 Phillips screws holding it on. So if we remove those screws, the binding should come right off. I've got a Phillips screwdriver here and I'm just taking out the screws. As you can see, the bindings are coming right off. Technically, you only need to take the front binding off to make the cut, but out of simplicity, I'm going to take the back one off just to make my cut easier and to show you that it's possible. Now that I've got the bindings removed from the skis, what I generally like to do to get my measurements is take the skis, put them down, put the sled on top. Now just adjust the skis so that they're close to the front of the sled and make it so that the edge of the sled is sitting flush with the edge of the ski. So as you can see, I've lined up the skis. So I left about 1 inch at the front here, and then I made the sides flush. So now that I have this roughly where I want it, what I like to do is take a pencil, mark the ski in front of this, because we're going to screw up from the bottom into here, and we're going to do the same there. So we're going to mark that, and then we want to mark the back of the ski where we're going to cut. So what I like to do is measure back, and as you can see, we're about 2¼ inches. So I'm going to come down and I'm going to make a mark at 3 inch, which is where I'm going to cut the back. Now that we've got our skis all measured, we need to cut. We need to cut the ski. So there's a few ways you can cut this. You could use a Sawzall, you could use your jigsaw. I'm going to show you the way I like to cut them. I like to cut these using my miter saw. Typically I take off my good blade because these skis have metal in the bottom. So if you use a good saw blade, it's going to damage the teeth on the blade. So I put an old blade on here, which I don't care if it gets damaged. Make sure you're wearing safety glasses if you're going to cut the skis this way. As you can see, there's quite a few sparks, and yes, this is safe for your saw. It won't damage it. Now that we've got the pieces we cut and we've got our lines marked on where we want it to go on the sled, we will flip the sled over and then we can screw them into place. We want to screw into the 1x4. So I'm going to take my board, line it up where I want it. It's flush on the edge, flush on the edge. I'll pre-drill and I'll use my same 1.5 inch screws to screw this into place. I like to put 2 screws again into each of the 1x4s. Once the first ski is on, flip it around and do the same for the other ski. Close up, you can see I screwed in, and you can take a chisel and you can just clean off that, which will help the sled just glide a little bit smoother. So again, we screwed into the 1x4, 1x4. Something I like to do is add rope. This gives you something to use to pull the sled. So just put the rope through the slats and then tie a knot, and you have a nice loop to pull from. If you want to, you could paint this wood, you could stain it, you can leave it natural. It all depends on what you want. I'm probably gonna stain this just to help seal up all this wood to make it last a lot longer. Another nice thing, I built this sled so that it would fit these generic inserts that you can buy off Amazon or at some of the stores. All you need to do is tie it around the slats. And just like that, we've got our DIY sled all finished up. Thanks for watching. Check out my other videos. I've got tons of great content, DIY projects, home improvement projects, home maintenance, renovation content. Thanks a lot, guys. If you have any questions, leave them down below in the comment section and I'll try and reply.